and industrial areas sit side by side, a silent danger can threaten an entire community with weapons in a chemical form when they least expect. Since 1945, at least 15,000 people have lost their lives in 300 major accidents involving industrial sites and the transportation of dangerous materials.
There are more than 100 facilities, including 29 here in Texas, that each endanger 1 million people or more.
But because of its chemical composition, it's not just an explosion, but another consequence that may pose the greatest risk. A toxic cloud with the ability to stretch for miles.
An HF cloud is denser than air. If the wind speed is low, the cloud stays hazardous for a longer time.
History points to the very real potential for disaster.
On April 16, 1947, the ammonium nitrate exploded. The equivalent we can compare nowadays to a hydrogen bomb going off.
If there were a very rapid release in the middle of a large population, it would be possible for thousands of people to die.
If there's a chemical leak in shelter in place, you're much safer than you would be outside trying to flee. There might be some exposure being limited.
With regard to refineries in the midst of large populations, it's an extremely bad idea.
Could a toxic cloud be the next mega disaster? Chemicals are essential in our modern world. They are used by refineries, water treatment plants, pulp and paper mills, and in almost every other industry throughout America. Chemistry has changed our way of life. Chemicals help produce our plastics and glass. Chlorine cleans the water we drink. Hydrofluoric acid boosts the gas in our cars. But each comes with a risk, including the potential for an explosive release. Oil refineries represent one of the biggest risks. The Chemical Safety Board investigated 167 serious accidents between 1982 and 2002, involving uncontrolled chemical releases at oil refineries around the nation. These accidents caused 108 deaths and hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage.
There are no risk-free refineries. There's usually something that can go wrong that will cause serious consequences.
There are more than 150 oil refineries across the United States, potentially endangering thousands of people each if toxic gases were to be accidentally released.
Refineries spend a great deal of effort trying to prevent accidents, but accidents are amazingly common in refineries. They're pretty hazardous environments. Things go wrong, explosions happen, fires happen.
If you look at the worst case scenario, there are some of these cities like Houston, like Philadelphia, that have refineries right there in the city that could put at risk millions of people.
Bruce Clausen is the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Director for Texas City, Texas. If any community knows firsthand the risks of chemical accidents, it's Texas City. And it's Clausen's job to be prepared.
I think we're ready. We train constantly, we drill constantly, we have the equipment, we have the training, the personnel, and we certainly have the desire and the knowledge to fight anything that might occur there and to bring it back under control quickly.
Hydrofluoric acid, or HF, has many industrial uses, including etching glass and in the manufacturing of pesticides, plastics, and high-octane fuels.
Hydrofluoric acid is used by at least 50 oil refineries around the country, and if released, hydrofluoric acid can form an aerosol cloud, which can go over to nearby communities.
It's very toxic to people. Basically destroys any kind of wet tissue. It's one of the most reactive chemicals that there is. If you get it on your skin, it goes immediately to the bone, destroying all the tissue in the process. If you breathe it, destroys your lungs, destroys your mucous membranes in your nose and eyes. extremely dangerous chemical.
Chlorine is widely used for disinfecting water and in food processing systems.
Chlorine gas can cause serious impacts, damage to the eyes and to the skin and to the lungs.
In 2000, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency warned that an accident at one of 123 chemical facilities could put more than 1 million people at risk of injury or death from toxic chemical exposure.
We know that many people are at risk of these chemicals because the chemical companies tell us that.
Is it only a matter of time before a devastating accident involving any one of these dangerous chemicals occurs? In nearly 50 communities across the U.S., there's the potential for an HF release from an oil refinery. Texas City is just one of them. On an ordinary day in this hypothetical situation, an oil refinery is performing routine maintenance. A series of explosions at the refinery breaches a large tank, releasing a toxic cloud of hydrofluoric acid. On this windless day, a deadly vapor hums the ground and creeps ominously through the neighborhood. More than 60 years earlier, an explosion in Texas City evokes this haunting scenario, and how it caught citizens completely unaware of the chemical dangers surrounding their homes.
That morning of April 16th, 1947, we woke up to a beautiful day.
People across the city were busy opening shops, going to school, or starting their workdays. Down at the city's busy port, longshoremen were loading the French freighter, the Grand Cup.
He was carrying, among other things, ammonium nitrate for fertilizer to go to Europe to help host World War II countries develop their feedstocks. At the same time was also carrying twine and a small amount of ammunition.
As the workers descended into the hull, they noticed smoke rising from underneath the bags of ammonium nitrate. They tried to put the fire out with water and small fire extinguishers, but it continued to smolder.
The Grand Camp's captain, who had very little English, came along and they were bringing a fire hose over, and he stopped them, saying he didn't want water in the hold because he didn't want water to ruin the cargo. From that point then, the fire just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
My husband, Marion Dennis Westmoreland, he was a volunteer fireman. He picked up the phone and he gave a code to the operator, and she told him where the fire was. My youngest son went in and got his dress fireman hat out to give to him. He says, "No, son, I'll wear my hard hat. I won't wear that to the fire." And then he left.
I was leaving to go to the school at that time, and I was riding my bicycle. I was about a block away from home when he came by me on his way to the fire. I'll never forget, he smiled at me and waved.
Of course, I had no idea, about how dangerous it was, and he didn't either. A thought came to me, well, suppose he don't come back, and when that thought came to me, I threw that mop down and I ran out the house and I ran around the house, and then I stopped at the back door and I was watching the fire, and these two huge plumes of yellow-orange flames going up. I could see from the ship.
At about 9:12 a.m., that's the best estimate of it, the ammonium nitrate exploded, and what could only be the equivalent we can compare nowadays to a hydrogen bomb going off.
On the second floor of the school, the first explosion, of course, blew out the windows, and the walls were plaster, and the room just filled with dust.
The entire fire department of 26 men were killed instantly.
Nobody ever said anything. We just knew. I just knew. And his brothers went to the hospitals. They went to the morgues for weeks. They took off their jobs for a whole week. His 4 brothers looking, trying to find him. Couldn't find that thing. Not once, nothing.
I know he was a brave man, a caring man.
Night and day, for 3 horrible days, the inferno that almost blasted Texas City from the map rages unchecked and uncontrollable. 29 fuel tanks, storing hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil, turn the night into a weird recollection of bombing missions over Europe. And as day dawns, the ghastly scene is revealed in all its ferocity.
The exploding ship triggers fires and destruction all over Texas City, creating a domino effect of devastation.
I was actually, instead of walking, I was running a little bit. And I just went to the left a little bit, and about that time, a piece of metal about as big as an automobile hit just where I had moved from. When I got up to the office, everybody was in bad shape. People were running around. Half of the people had their clothes blown off of them. They were covered with black oil in the parking lot across from the plant. This was a terrible scene and a terrible thing to happen.
It was a week before all of the fires were extinguished. More than 500 people were dead, 3,500 injured, 2,000 were left homeless, and a third of the homes in Texas City were condemned. The damage was estimated at $75 million.
We have to understand, up until 9/11/2001, that was the worst man-made disaster ever.
The Texas City disaster showed us how deadly these chemicals can be.
It's been more than 60 years since the disaster in Texas City, and you'd think by now we would have learned that we need to take additional precautions to protect our communities.
With oil refineries and chemical facilities using and storing dangerous chemicals across the country, what if something should go wrong? Are the lives of millions of people at risk? Nearly every facet of modern society relies in some measure on industrial chemistry. With roots in the manufacture of gunpowder and munitions, the chemical industry boomed after World War II as an essential part of the growing peacetime manufacturing industry. The products and quality of life produced by commercial chemistry were accepted uncritically, a positive sign of a modernizing world. Over time, the costs of harnessing the power of chemistry would start to be made clear.
We have facilities that are storing large amounts of hazardous chemicals, which, if released accidentally or deliberately by a terrorist, could cause mass devastation and loss of life.
The most common industrial chemicals, ammonia, chlorine, and hydrofluoric acid, are corrosive, toxic, and explosively reactive. Manufacturing, storing, and transporting them is inherently dangerous. The list and the risks go on. Seveso, Italy, July 1976. A dioxin release. At a chemical plant, more than 4 pounds of dioxin, an unwanted byproduct of chemical reactions, is accidentally released into the air. 37,000 people are exposed, 1,600 examined, and 15 children hospitalized. Whatever livestock survived are slaughtered to prevent contamination traveling up the food chain. Alberton, Montana, April 1996, a chlorine release. In a train accident, 19 rail cars derail. A tank car ruptures, releasing more than 60 tons of chlorine. A toxic plume crosses the Clark Fork River, enveloping homes, schools, churches. 350 are treated for chlorine inhalation, and 1 person dies. The world's worst chemical accident happens on December 3rd, 1984.
A very tragic incident in a plant in Bhopal, India,
where through a series of missteps and mistakes, a large quantity of methyl isocyanate was released.
When a toxic cloud overtakes the large population living near the plant, more than 3,000 die immediately, and nearly 15,000 deaths are related to the accident. The Bhopal disaster proved to be a watershed event, encouraging the U.S. government to require companies to release information about their storage of toxic chemicals, and mandate by law improvements in emergency and evacuation planning.
I think the chemical companies are taking a lot of initiatives to prevent disasters. I will tell you that it's not uniform throughout the industry.
And incidents across the U.S. still occur. How often? Between 1988 and 1992, 34,500 accidents involving toxic chemicals were reported to the EPA. In other words, 19 times a day. Dangers all too real for a community like Texas City. In 1987, 40 years after the initial disaster, another lethal release put the same community in jeopardy again.
I was actually at a meeting with all of the people concerned with accidents in the oil industry when we heard a news announcement that there had been an accidental release at the Marathon refinery. They couldn't understand what could have happened, but they were sure that nothing was dropped on the HF tank because it's completely against industry policy to do heavy lifting over HF tanks. As it turned out, they had a crane to lift this very heavy heat exchanger. One of the legs on the crane collapsed and dropped the heat exchanger on the HF tank. The thing that the industry people said never would happen.
According to eyewitnesses, a chemical spray shot almost 200 feet into the air, and a cloud moved downwind to the nearby neighborhood.
Marathon contacted the town, said, "We have a leak. We need the roads blocked off." So the police officers went straight into a cloud without knowing what it was. No masks, no preparations for it. Just went down there to block traffic to keep the general public out of harm's way.
We were instructed to go out into the area and do some washdowns, but we didn't wear any protective clothing other than what the fire department calls our bunker gear. We had no masks, and we weren't instructed to wear anything as far as breathing apparatus.
The response was a number of people sheltered in place. Some were evacuated to a public building. The city actually shut down for quite some time, for several hours, while the situation was brought under control. The sirens worked. The people were informed, not as well as they could have been by today's standards, but they were informed.
Hydrofluoric acid is lethal. Skin, eyes, and throat burn on contact, and the vapor burns the lungs, filling them with fluid that leads to seizures and death. More than 1,000 people were treated for cardiovascular issues, breathing, throat, and eye problems. Almost 100 were hospitalized. The toxic cloud left a visible path of destruction in the town.
Well, HF kills vegetation, and so you can tell if a high concentration of HF has been around because all the vegetation turns brown. And this was, in fact, how they could track where that plume went in the neighborhood. They went around and found the brown lawns and brown trees, dead vegetation from where that plume had to come down. So they were able to get some pretty good diagnostic information as to how far that plume went into the neighborhoods afterwards.
It's a fact of life for many Americans living and working in close proximity to refineries and chemical plants. Once situated in remote environments, these facilities are now surrounded by houses that could be directly affected in the event of a chemical leak.
This is a sensitive subject for the oil industry because they recognize the extreme risk that they're subjecting our communities to by having this ticking time bomb right in our neighborhoods, right next to playgrounds, right next to churches, right next to major metropolises. It's really unacceptable that they're still using these outdated, extremely hazardous technologies.
People are slowly waking up to the dangers in their own backyards. Texas City is still a hub for the chemical industry, An average of 22 vessels a day move 60 million tons of cargo through the port, about 97% of which are petroleum and chemicals for the refineries.
People in Texas City accept the presence of the petrochemical and the chemical industries as part of our lives. We're proud of living here, and it is how we make our living. We've lived here all our lives. It's always been part of it.
7 years after the Marathon incident, and 58 years after the first accident, another explosion rocked Texas City.
I felt this low rumble. And having grown up in this town, I'd felt that a couple of times before and knew it wasn't thunder. Walked straight out the front door and looked up and saw the black plume coming up over the city.
In 2005, there was a large explosion at one of the refineries. 15 people were killed. Some antiquated equipment caused a major explosion.
Walked up to a fire captain who was a friend of mine and just said, "How bad is it?" And I'll never forget. He just turned and he says, "It's the worst I've seen."
We learned not only that disaster, but each of our disasters. We study it very carefully. We decide what we did right, what we can improve on. We study everything that we do from that perspective. In 2005, the response was a great deal different. The community was not harmed other than broken windows and certainly broken hearts and broken souls. But the community was not harmed as it was in 1947.
A quick response time is essential in protecting the communities around these facilities.
In Texas City, both the chemical and the petroleum refineries work with us. We plan for every hazard. That's the approach we take, to be prepared for anything. We could have a leak, we could have a fire.
But is reliance on emergency response enough to ensure no loss of life?
Well, I think what individual companies need to do is take full responsibility for managing their hazards, whatever they are.
There'll be another disaster here. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be because people are going to get complacent again, and things that haven't been thought of yet are going to be super dangerous 20 years from now.
America's oil refining industry began more than 150 years ago. Expansion was rapid and explosive, with refineries springing up in the middle of nowhere across the U.S. The structures are only surface indicators for the deep and significant role oil has played in reshaping the landscape. Refineries created jobs, bringing development, housing, and other businesses to previously underpopulated areas. Infrastructures were developed to transport and store the chemicals needed to refine crude oil into a variety of products for American consumers. There are currently 153 refineries across the country, but nowhere is the story of the changes brought by oil more emblematic than in Texas. For importing and exporting oil, its catalysts, and its byproducts, there's Texas City.
These days, Port Texas City is one of the top 5 in the country as far as tonnage, somewhere around 17 million tons of material move in and out of here on a regular basis. Anytime you start up your car, that's what's going into it. Or anytime you have something made out of plastic, to get those things made, they've got to be through petrochemical facilities. And this is where it comes.
And it's a dangerous business. Refineries are the largest users of hydrofluoric acid, or HF, one of the most dangerous commercially handled chemicals.
It's used as a catalyst in the refinery process. Very efficient catalyst. It's used to make high-octane gasoline.
Chemical spills during transportation can be stunningly lethal. In worst-case scenarios, common chemicals such as hydrofluoric acid, ammonia, or chlorine may transform from a liquid into an aerosol, creating a toxic cloud with the potential to wreak irreversible damage on anything in its path. It's happened before. Minot, North Dakota, 2002. Anhydrous ammonia release. On January 18th, 5 tank cars carrying anhydrous ammonia ruptured in a derailment, releasing more than 200,000 gallons of poisonous gas that drifted over the town. A thick, toxic fog covered a third of the town and hampered rescue efforts. When it was all clear, one man died, and more than 300 men, women, and children were injured. Of the more than 150 refineries across America, 50 still use and store hydrofluoric acid. What would happen if HF were accidentally released?
We were contacted by Amoco Oil Company and asked if our expertise in dense gas dispersion in the atmosphere would allow us to help them assess hydrofluoric acid and what would happen if it were released accidentally. It became pretty clear as we talked, but nobody knew exactly what would happen if there were a large-scale hydrofluoric acid release.
In an effort to attain a clear-eyed view of risk, Amoco financed experiments that might help delineate and mitigate risk factors in potential spills.
Well, the surprising results from those initial experiments were that all of the HF that's released goes downwind as an airborne cloud. A large percentage of it is aerosol, and the rest of it is vapor, but it all goes downwind as an airborne cloud. The liquid droplets in the aerosol are so fine that they remain airborne. In very humid areas, you can see it all the way down to the point where it really is no longer dangerous. In less humid areas, it's dangerous even when you can't see it. And if there are people in its path, it will kill them or injure them.
Critics would like to see the oil industry abandon the use of HF altogether.
There are many commercially available alternatives to hydrofluoric acid. New refineries can be built using solid acid catalysts. Existing refineries could also switch to sulfuric acid and to modified hydrofluoric acid, each of which have far fewer risks to the neighboring communities.
Experts concur that the possibility does exist to leave HF behind.
First of all, let me say that replacing chemicals to safer chemicals is a very good idea. HF is a very toxic chemical, so then you ask the question, can we replace it with an inherently safer chemical? Sulfuric acid, which is another acid, can be used as a catalyst in the same process.
But exchanging HF for sulfuric acid, presumably at considerable cost, could not alone completely mitigate risk.
The problem with inherently safe design in refineries and other industries that have a huge amount of stored energy involved in what they do is that usually when things go bad, that stored energy is released in some way. And in a refinery, there are huge quantities of flammable materials, toxic materials, and so forth in very complicated processes.
Trading out chemicals will have no impact on reducing the number of accidents. It may even increase their probability.
You have to use anywhere from 25 times more to some estimates of about 140 times more sulfuric acid than HF. What that then results in is that you have more piping, more equipment, more vessels, and so on and so forth, which are again going to be susceptible to failure or terrorist attacks. Humans can make mistakes, and because of that, accidents can happen.
The 1947 Texas City fire and explosion were a watershed.
Today, when we deal with any chemical, very quickly we have something called the MSDS, the Manufacturer Safety Data Sheet. We very quickly know what it is we're dealing with, what it can do, what we should do and not do. At that time, no such thing existed.
Emergency crew readiness helps save lives, but automatic systems need to be in place to react as soon as something goes wrong.
The protective systems that refineries use involve rapid detection of HF, so if there is a leak, it's detected essentially immediately. That means HF sensors around the HF unit in all directions. That system then has to trigger an automated response system. You can't wait for the operator to decide to do something. You really need something that's automated.
Safety procedures have improved over the years.
One of the mitigation systems that has been reasonably successful is use of water curtains. So when the HF release occurs, the gas sensors come on, it sends a signal and the water curtains come on. Now HF is not very soluble in the water, but what it does is that it knocks the HF down and gets collected in the water collection system. And from there, then you can process it and get the HF out.
Threat of terrorist action raises the stakes for any industry dealing with deadly chemicals. The nation's oil refineries are a major focus of Homeland Security.
Since September 11th, we've recognized that there's heightened concern about these facilities. According to the U.S. Army Surgeon General, after a widespread biological attack, an attack on a chemical facility is the second greatest risk to our national security. We don't have to worry about terrorists trying to smuggle in a bomb when we've got these facilities spread throughout our country, just waiting for our terrorists to detonate it.
One chemical of high concern to the security community is chlorine. The EPA estimates that at least 1,200 plants store 2,500 pounds of it or more.
The greatest risk is chlorine gas, and that's used by water treatment plants, wastewater facilities, paper and pulp mills all across the country. Chlorine gas, which was used as a chemical weapon, has been taken off the battlefield and now is being used in our backyards in these facilities.
Experts wonder if we can reduce our reliance on chlorine to avoid the consequences of a future release. Americans have suffered the devastating effects of a chlorine spill before. There are more than 16,000 wastewater treatment plants in the U.S. Each one uses large amounts of chemicals in the purification process. Many, like chlorine, are hazardous. In Washington, D.C., a wastewater treatment plant sits along the banks of the Potomac River, just 4 miles from the U.S. Capitol.
You're at the Blue Plains Advanced Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is located on about 53 acres of land here in southwest Washington, D.C. We serve a population of about 1.6 million people, and this is one of the largest advanced wastewater treatment plants in the world.
Both security and water processing are closely monitored at every stage.
We're in our process control center, and this particular room is the heart of the operation where we can monitor everything that's going on in the facility. Our wastewater personnel can monitor the flows, the chemicals, and just about everything that occurs here at the plant.
As the wastewater comes to the plant, the first thing we do, or part of the first thing we do, is to remove any odor-causing compounds in the wastewater by adding products like chlorine or sodium hypochlorite.
Caution and expertise are paramount, as chlorine used to kill bacteria in wastewater can also form into gas that kills people.
Many people have probably seen the old World War I movies where they've had mustard gas where it kind of laid along the ground and it would start to create respiratory problems for the soldiers. Chlorine gas will do the same thing.
Released into the atmosphere, chlorine forms a dense, low-hanging cloud capable of spreading for miles on the wind. The pungent yellow-green acidic gas will destroy moist tissues of eyes, throat, and lungs on contact. Death by asphyxiation is rapid, and accidents do happen. Graniteville, South Carolina, January 6, 2005. A chlorine release. A freight train carrying tankers of chlorine smashed into a park train. Leaking chlorine gas threatened the people of the town. More than 5,400 people were evacuated. 554 were treated for chlorine exposure, and 9 people died. Despite the potential hazards of storing and transporting chlorine, its uses in the water purification process have been key in sustaining health and hygiene in an industrialized society.
it's probably the single greatest advancement that mankind has seen, certainly in our lifetime, with regard to sanitation and the ability to kill bacteria and bad things that we don't want to have in the environment or to be around us. So it's a significant chemical as it relates to health-related kinds of things.
Can we replace chlorine with some other chemical that would not have such kind of consequences? The answer is probably yes. There's another chemical called sodium hypochlorite, which does the same thing, but it's not as simple as that, okay? Sodium hypochlorite itself is manufactured from chlorine. So in other words, you would have a large plant where all this manufacturing of sodium hypochlorite would be occurring. And that's what I would call risk accumulation. And maybe we can handle that. Maybe we can manage that if we have proper systems there. But my point is that you have concentrated all the risk now in one location, and we've better have a good plan for that.
Given its proximity to the nation's capital, the Blue Plains plant faces sensitive issues of safety and security.
The Washington, D.C. area is probably one of the most target-rich environments in the country. We have to look at ourselves a little differently than if I were someplace else in the world. We did an analysis and looked at what would happen if we had a catastrophic accident with the chlorine here. How far would the plume go upstream, where the prevailing winds are, and how it would be directed. We would see that if it was an absolute catastrophic failure, probably headed somewhere over near the capital.
Immediately following the terrorists' attacks on 9/11, management at Blue Plains decided that with their proximity to the Pentagon, removing chlorine from their site was a necessity.
Our general manager determined that it was something that we had to do immediately. He formed a team, got everyone involved, the entire organization, and within 90 days, the chlorine was out of our facilities. I'm actually standing on a location where we would have had a 90-ton railroad car that would have been dispensing chlorine for our process here. And directly behind me, you would find the U.S. Capitol, and that's about 2.5 miles away from us. So if we would have a chlorine emergency, there's always a possibility, as the wind is blowing now, the possibility the wind could blow it in that direction.
The cost of making the conversion in the final numbers was about $12.5 million, plus the money that we had spent to do the temporary chlorine utilization when we made that switch over. And the product itself is a more expensive product. And it's delivered in tank trucks, so obviously you move the hazard off of the rail and onto the roadway, but you don't get the same effect if there was something catastrophic to happen to it.
Another chemical used at Blue Plains is methanol. While less hazardous to the community, it is still dangerous.
Methanol is a highly flammable material, and we use it in the process of what we call feeding our bugs. It's to feed the bugs in the sewage process. The big risk with methanol is the potential of a fire. We think we have state-of-the-art equipment for dealing with our methanol. The storage tanks that we have below ground are encased. They're also monitored. We have monitoring alarms. We know when we have a leak. Our system also includes a fire suppression. We spend many hours working with the District of Columbia Fire Department and training their personnel on all chemicals that we have here on the plant, and methanol is one of them.
Already, investigations have begun to move away from methanol.
Our wastewater and engineering department, they're looking at other chemicals and other processes that we can utilize to replace methanol. Hopefully that's one of the things we'll be able to accomplish in the future.
The widespread use of industrial chemicals poses undeniable risks, but remains critical to our standard of living.
Part of the dangers of today is that many of these nearby communities aren't told that they're living next to facilities that could cause mass damage to their communities.
Will the next hard rain America faces come in the form of a toxic cloud? The slope-stack forests and pipe mazes of oil refineries and chemical plants are familiar features on our urban landscape. Communities are aware of the potential risks of these facilities, and most understand the ramifications of a toxic leak.
It's not unreasonable to think that something as bad as Bhopal could happen right here in the United States. We have facilities that are storing large amounts of hazardous chemicals, which, if released accidentally or deliberately by a terrorist, could cause mass devastation and loss of life.
Safety concerns have prompted companies to take extra measures to protect their neighbors.
According to the U.S. Army Surgeon General, in one scenario, the release of a chemical could result in the deaths of between 1 and 2.4 million people in a major metropolis.
The majority of the incidents, maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 90%, the majority of them occur because we didn't do things that we knew how to do. And I think that's intolerable, that's inexcusable.
The situation in Texas City is emblematic of many across the U.S.
Texas City is a city of about 40,000 people, and generally the population swells to about 50,000 each day, depending on the number of construction workers that are come and go. It's a heavy industrialized city. We have a number of chemical plants and refineries here.
Folks in this community grew up around here for the most part. They're used to what's here. They're not fazed by it. Being no different than someone living in Los Angeles having to deal with earthquakes.
The sheer number of refineries, chemical plants, and storage depots in the port has Texas City prepared for almost anything.
Each industry is involved in a mutual aid group, and some possess some types of equipment, others possess other. When it's all brought together, it's a substantial amount of equipment. We can fight a blaze or a fire or a spill.
Recent accidents in Texas City have been contained on site. Not since 1947 has the community been seriously threatened. But like in nearly 50 other cities and towns across America, HF remains a threat. Could a mega disaster happen again? The scenario is hypothetical, but the potential is real. It's a warm summer day, and near a quiet residential neighborhood, an oil refinery is performing routine maintenance. A series of explosions at the refinery launches a large tank of hydrofluoric acid, and a toxic cloud is released. The hole is in the side of the tank, and the gas rushes out. The effects are catastrophic.
In 1987 in Texas City, when the Marathon Oil Refinery released a massive cloud of hydrofluoric acid, that sent 1,000 people to the hospital. If that chemical had shot out sideways, it could have killed hundreds or thousands of people instantly.
The safety systems are overwhelmed by the rapid release, and the toxic cloud drifts slowly toward an unsuspecting population. There's little wind this day, and the vapor hugs the ground as it drifts ominously through the neighborhood.
An HF cloud is denser than air, and it moves downwind with the wind speed. So if the wind speed is low, the cloud persists for a longer time, it stays hazardous for a longer time, and it goes further downwind.
Emergency teams are notified, and the response is activated.
The sirens are loud. There are 16 of them in the community, and they're designed to alert you that there's a problem. And we can call individuals in the community in under 10 minutes. We can call everyone.
Using a shower of water as Koopman did in his experiments, the workers get the situation under control at the refinery.
We found if we applied 40 parts of water to 1 part of HF, that was enough to dilute the HF and bring it down onto the ground, so that it was no longer an airborne hazard.
But the toxic vapor has already begun carving a path of destruction in this town. For is subjected to a high concentration of the HF, even briefly, the exposure can be fatal.
If there's a chemical leak, you shelter in place. Studies show us that inside your home, you're much safer than you would be outside trying to flee. There might be some exposure, be limited.
People need to go inside, close all their doors and windows, turn off their heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems, seal up the windows if they can, but basically stay in place until the cloud passes over.
In places where the cloud is the heaviest, people don't stand a chance. The vapor attacks their skin and destroys tissue and bone. Many will have seizures, and most will die. By evening, the city begins to take stock of the damage. The number of dead and injured could be staggering.
It's an extremely reactive gas, so it reacts with everything it comes in contact with, and it disperses and is diluted and finally just disappears into small quantities.
This hypothetical scenario has not occurred yet in the United States. Many believe it's just a matter of time. And so, for communities in potential danger zones, being prepared for the inevitable might be the only solution.
There is always a concern that something will happen, something will go wrong, causing a release, and so that's why mitigation systems are so important, is to have something in place that will protect people if that happens.
There's enough hazardous cargo on the roadways that travel through almost every community that each community needs to train and prepare. Ours is a bit different. We know it's the industries, but you can prepare, you can train, and so that when something might occur or does occur, you can respond appropriately.
Worst case scenarios are almost always catastrophic, and they would be with the refineries as well. If there were a very rapid release from a refinery that was in the middle of a large population, it would be possible for thousands of people to die. So I think that's what refineries in population centers are faced with. They have to make sure that that sort of accident never happens.